story turns out the way he wants it to. We adults have learned that it's not easy to use the language of selfishness and self-absorption. It's not acceptable. So we come up with ways of asserting our desires, cleverly masked by language games and nuances we've learned to play. In that way, we're able to talk about how desperately we want our way without sounding desperate about having our way. Jacob had learned that game very well. For Jacob, in his time and in his setting, it was a language of seeking a blessing. He lived in a culture and a religious context in which the importance of seeking a blessing was something everyone understood. Not only that, but in his particular family, blessing had an especially significant place. Jacob had grown up hearing about God's blessing to Abraham, how it would be through his family that God's blessing would extend to the world. This wasn't just any blessing. This was a blessing that had some major stakes. Trouble was, Jacob felt he had lost the blessing to Esau at their birth. As a result, he came into the world angry and frustrated, and life was not going to turn out the way he believed, or so he thought. His name means heel grabber, striver, coercer, someone who's struggling to get the things they want. We see as his life unfolds that he was aptly named. Eventually, Jacob cheated away from Esau this special blessing. And then he ran away. He hid from his family, severing relationships that had been his most significant. And as far as we know, he never saw his mother or father again. Jacob and Esau were the sole survivors of the family, and as such were the ones through whom the blessing would be passed. And yet, in the decades of his absence, Jacob had to worry about his relationship with Esau, which he desired now, but which was very threatening to him. That was part of the price, getting his own way. A Christian counselor I once knew, and whom I heard speak, said after working nearly 40 years as a therapist, and looking back on the years of his practice, he said, "I've spent time with people from all walks of life and all religious persuasions and beliefs. And at the core of those conversations, the central question that every single person had been asking was, what must I do to be saved? Or how do I get a blessing? Who will finally bless me in a way that will set my identity, my life, my relationships, my world at peace?" This was Jacob's question. As a second son, he had to fight and connive to receive the blessing and inheritance. And once he had it, he realized it wasn't enough. Jacob wasn't at all clear about his identity or value. He seemed to be constantly struggling to gain more things, to have more power, more influence, more livestock, the bride he wanted. Like the story of Jacob's life, our stories are often records of struggling to find someone who will bless us. Now our text is shrouded in mystery. It tells of an encounter, a wrestling match between Jacob and a man in which something incredible was at stake. Jacob's opponent was obviously divinely appointed, at least by God, to bring God's presence first and foremost to Jacob. It might have been an angel, or even God himself. Now, there's a theological term that we talk about. It's the word theophany. It means a pre-incarnation appearance of God or Jesus. The high priest Melchizedek was one of these individuals. And this angel is one of these possible pre-incarnation appearances of God or Jesus himself. We know that angels can manifest themselves in a solid form, and we know that we entertain them unawares. So it's not an idea totally out of sync with Scripture. After preparing a gift of livestock to assuage Esau's anger, which he anticipated meeting, Jacob separates himself from his family and then goes off on his own. And this text simply says, a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. What we sense is a clear engagement. Jacob and this other person wrestle, and it's not for a brief time. It's all night. The center of the story of this mysterious wrestling match between Jacob and this enigmatic figure, which the Scripture refuses to precisely identify, it is a struggle for a blessing. And while later Christian tradition depicts this figure as an angel, the Bible is not real clear about that. In our passage, the figure is simply referred to as a man. Yet, at the end of the passage, Jacob declares that he has seen the face of God. This is not an imaginary experience. This is not a dream. Jacob had some real physical injury because of this struggle. And so Jacob emerges then as somewhat of a hero. First, his demand for a blessing shows that he recognizes that the man is something other than a robber, certainly. And second, it is Jacob who declares that this is God. Third, rather than bow down before this figure, he wrestles him to a draw. So up to this point in the story, Jacob has never been depicted as a strong person. That's Esau's role. But the reader is left to conclude that Jacob survives out of the pure stubbornness to not give in. The bigger picture that we often miss is that this really is a story about Israel and God. In fact, it is Israel's story about itself and its relationship to the Lord. How interesting to know that Israel, which is the new name given to Jacob, defines itself, the nation does, as a people who refuses to let go of God. They tell us that they will fight with God to demand that Yahweh bless them. There are people who are willing to be changed, even damaged in that exchange, because they know that attaining that blessing is worth whatever sacrifice needs to be made. They are not a people of a passive faith. Remember the account in Genesis 18 of Abraham bargaining with God over Sodom. It's just Abraham and God left after these two, again, angelic figures walk away. And we pick up the narrative in verse 22. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, now, this takes nerve. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you, speaking to God. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Kind of nervy, huh? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Well, this goes on back and forth until Abraham gets down to 10. He goes down by 10 each time. And when he gets down to 10, God says, well, if there's 10 people there, okay, I'll spare the city. Obviously there wasn't. But Abraham wrestled with God. So Jacob wrestled with God because he thought it was the only way to get God's blessing. He had been grabbing heels to get ahead in his life, and here he was grabbing God's heel. He said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. When was the last time that you struggled with God? When was the last time that there was such a challenge in your life that you prayed and prayed and prayed about, knowing how powerful prayer is, how real its results are? Sometimes I hear people say that something is so important to them, and they pray one prayer one time, and that's it. They don't wrestle with God. They don't struggle with God. One of the most durable relationships we have is with God. Sometimes we treat God as if we argue or we don't understand or we question something, he's going to run and go away and leave our lives. Couldn't be further from the truth. Your relationship with the Lord is the most durable relationship in your life. He will stand by you. He will have patience with you. He will endure these conversations with you and your faults and your failures, and he'll still be there. When was the last time something was so important to you that you struggled with God in prayer? Or you tried a new ministry? Or you tried another way of serving